everybody, Ty here. Hope everyone is doing well. So, in recent time, we dropped the February outlook, and of course, we were expecting a warming trend. And since, well, the early part of February, we often have Groundhog Day, let's do a little something similar to that here. And we'll go ahead and take a sneak peek at what spring could look like. Now, the thing about this is, and we mentioned in the February outlook, even that's not set in stone. So if that isn't, surely this isn't either. So that being said, take what you're hearing in this video with a grain of salt. None of this is set in stone, but we're going to talk about some things that we notice on this outlook and how this will impact the weather if things stay as they are right now. That being said, let's go ahead and get into it here. So no need to really look at February since we already talked about it at this point. And the funniest part about all of that actually is if I look at the temperature map in particular, it's that it's really not that dissimilar from the February outlook that we looked at not long ago. Link in the top right hand corner to the February outlook video, by the way, or the first one. Second one will be coming later this month. But in any case though, as you can see here, this is what we have going on right now. There's going to be a trend in February that pretty much remains throughout most of spring here, where we're going to be anticipating below average temperatures out towards the northwest here. Some of these northern states were in the February outlook, but that area does look like it shrinks ever so slightly. And then towards the southern US, especially towards the southwest and really all the way up the eastern seaboard, it pretty much looks almost like a carbon copy of what we saw in the February outlook, minus this little area over here where the higher confidence of above average temperatures expands all the way into the Gulf Coast here. So, like I said, a lot of moving parts with this still, but for the most part, not too dissimilar from what we've already seen here. As I mentioned in the February outlook, I am kind of leery of severe weather potential with this. Do think at times we're going to be dealing with the collision of warm and cold air masses. Timing is still, of course, very much questionable at this range, almost impossible to try to figure out currently. But with this pattern, of course, severe weather threats do seem like they're going to be possible as we go further along here. Another idea as to how things are trending is often looking over towards Alaska. Over towards Alaska, you can see that we have this little area of below average temperatures here, and of course that works its way into the northwest. Up towards the northern and western parts of the state though, we're starting to see more and more of those above average temperatures coming into play here. And if you're wondering why that's important, we can actually go to the next set of months leading to the end of spring into summer, and you can see a very similar deal going on here, except for one thing. Those below average temperature probabilities are now gone. We're starting to see more in the way of above average temperature probabilities towards the northern western parts of the state, and more so equal chances right now. Again, as I've said before, none of this is set in stone by any stretch of the imagination. This is just kind of taking a look out there. Trying to make a forecast on this at this point in time would be just taking a shot in the dark. Maybe you might hit, but more than likely you're going to miss. But in any case though, let's go back. We'll also take a look at the precipitation outlooks here. We're going to of course go back and start with March, April, and May. And there's one thing in particular that's kind of caught my eye here. One thing in particular is out here towards the west. I mentioned this in the February outlook, and it's the fact that this area, I'm always interested in what winter and early part of spring is like for this, because with severe weather season coming up, there's a particular element that we often look at. We don't talk about it all the time here, but it's called the elevated mixed layer. And it's usually a little layer of dry air that usually sinks its way to the middle of the atmosphere. And this can help severe storms actually. Now, I know what you're thinking, probably, how in the world can dry air help severe storms? Isn't one of the four parameters that's necessary for severe weather moisture? Yes, that's true, but getting into the details of that will actually end up being another video. So otherwise we might turn this into like a half hour, 2 hour long video possibly. So we're not going to do that. But in any case though, a lot of times the air from the elevated mixed layer comes from this region here. So seeing this heightened probability of below average precip here, definitely a bit of a brow racer for me. Other than that, and really even with this, nothing too dissimilar from what we've seen with the February outlook. Very dry over here, also a bit dry towards Florida, and increased chances of precipitation over towards the Ohio, Tennessee, and maybe even parts of the Great Lakes as well, Mid-Atlantic and Ozarks too. Then also towards the northwest, probabilities of precipitation come into play too. Now, this isn't going to tell us exactly what the storm track and the jet stream are going to be doing, because those are all going to be key factors, surface lows, and all those other bells and whistles. Obviously, at this range, we're not going to be able to see them. So, no point in really saying that, oh, we're guaranteed to have severe weather in this area right now. But these are a couple signals that I'm going to be watching in the coming months, of course, as we go forward. Another interesting signal, of course, is over towards Alaska. Now, precipitation doesn't quite work the same as with the temperatures. Temperatures kind of flow a little bit differently. Precipitation's just a little bit more intricate in regards to how things end up panning out for the Northwest in comparison to Alaska. Where those lows end up tracking play a big part in that. But over towards the northern half of the state there, we do have above average signals for precipitation and kind of equal to slightly below average chances towards the south here. But we're kind of more or less maintaining across this part of the state. Sometimes we see a couple of active weather events here, but for the most part, wouldn't expect anything too serious over here, of course. Let's go ahead and move to the following set of months here. And this is going to be April, May, and June. So this will close out spring heading into summer again. And this is a little bit worrying to see this signal, because this area is also, of course, prone to wildfires. So seeing this below average signal, especially for people that have already been looking for rain, unfortunately, well, I'm afraid I got some bad news. But in any case, though, this doesn't mean that every single day is going to be dry. I do think there will be opportunities here and there, but however, they may be more few and far in between. For some of these areas that already don't get moisture, then, well, that's kind of a bad sign. But in any case, though, out towards the west, it looks like things start to really quiet down the further along we get into spring and head towards summer. So a little bit concerned there, but we'll have to see how things pan out. Again, as I've said before, this isn't completely set in stone. Now, in regards to Alaska, of course, not really going to pay too much attention to the northwest where there's equal chances, but there is a correlation between the two on this one, at least. Equal chance of precipitation again. Northern part of the state looks really active right now in regards to precipitation in pretty much the entire season, so definitely going to be keeping an eye on that. What kind of precipitation we'll get, it's kind of hard to tell. It's a little bit variable. Mostly will be rain. I wouldn't say anything along the lines of maybe winter weather, but you also have to remember, this is compared to average. This isn't necessarily saying that you're going to get any kind of rain or a bunch of rain from this, but definitely curious with this state here in particular. I don't know quite as much with Alaska. Another thing to make note of here is, again, over towards the northern states in particular, especially over towards Great Lakes, Mid-Atlantic, Northeast as well, and the Ohio Valley, it does look like there's going to be increased chances for precipitation throughout the spring for this region here in either case. So bet you're wondering, okay, why do things look so different in comparison to previous years? Part of that's going to have to do with our ENSO, because right now we're in what's called a La Nina phase, where the temperatures are currently below average towards a specific part of the Pacific Ocean. I always mess that up. But in that region here, it affects our weather. That region there will affect our weather significantly whenever it's above, below, or about at average. Right now, we're about 1 degree Celsius below average. Usually when that happens, we end up seeing cold weather out towards the northern states. Depending on other factors, we can end up seeing that kind of work its way down to the south, which is unfortunately what we've been seeing. Hence the winter storms lately, along with the frigid cold that we've been experiencing and are still expecting. But the thing about it is, as we go further along, we can actually expect that we're going to be shifting from the La Nina into a neutral ENSO. So the neutral ENSO range is from negative 0.5 degrees Celsius to positive 0.5 degrees Celsius. So we're right about at average, just maybe a little bit above or below. La Nina starts below negative 0.5 degrees Celsius, and El Nino is above positive 0.5 degrees Celsius. So for the most part, we're starting to hang into that neutral phase from this point. And with that, it's going to kind of level things off with the weather. And we can even expect some of this into summer. So it's a little bit of a further look ahead for you guys. How that affects hurricane season actually would be a good thing. It would be right about at average. Not saying that having average numbers is a guarantee that nothing bad will happen, but a super active season is never a good thing in any case with that. But this also kind of keep things a little bit more on or less on average in regards to our weather in general for the most part. Of course, there are still, of course, as I've said before, unknown factors that play into that as well. But put in perspective for you just what we're dealing with right now. This is where we are currently. This is our La Nina phase. And then, as you can see here, this is us getting into that neutral phase as we get into February and beyond here. It's going to be pretty rapid here, so there will be a point where weather does, I do anticipate some weather, some active weather at times. I don't think it'll get all out crazy, but like I said, none of this is set in stone. But in any case, though, I am curious as to what happens during this spring time frame here. As we get towards summer, I think we definitely will be leveling off, though. Now, how this goes month to month, of course, it's still questionable. I really don't even like using this map for the whole month to month thing. Week to week is a little bit better, but obviously we can't go week to week for 6 months possibly. But in any case, though, you can still kind of get an idea of what these air masses are doing on the month to month basis here. This is February right now that we're looking at currently. As you can see, warm air already starting to build up over towards the southeastern half of the U.S. Off to the northwest, we still have some cold air lingering around. As we go further along, March looks like the most interesting month in regards to activity here. Depending on where the jet stream sets up as well, could be a big factor. And that's still why I'm super leery of severe weather potential, is because of this look right here. I've seen this look many a times. Definitely has the look of a negative PNA, where we have that warm air set up over towards the southern U.S., cold air out towards the northwest. And depending on where that jet stream falls, we end up getting a collision between the two air masses, and we get frontal boundaries. Frontal boundaries equal storms. Pretty simple there. So we go further along as we get towards April, though, we kind of level off a little bit. We see a little bit more in the way of warming out towards the southwest and the southern plains states. So if severe weather were to occur, it would probably start to shift a little bit off to the west. Then by the time we get towards May, we definitely seem like we're starting to level off, starting to deal with those warmer air masses here as far as the height anomaly is concerned. Just exactly what we're dealing with is still, of course, unknown at this time. We're already looking 4 months out in advance, so can't have a whole lot of confidence in that. And then as we end spring and start to sneak into summer at this point, we're pretty much looking at a warming trend for the entire lower 48 by this point. So we're just kind of in that wait and see mode in regards to what could happen next year. Ugh. Now, how this will affect our temperature outlook over the course of every 30 days or so, still pretty interesting here as well. So we're going to be comparing two models here. So this is the typical CFS model that I like to use for pretty much all my outlooks here, but we're also going to compare it to the NMME model. But really at this point, like I said, we can make all the model comparisons we want. This is still pretty much a shot in the dark here in regards to a forecast. So we're just kind of looking at trends right now. But the most common trend, again, as I've said before, is going to be the warming trend that we're going to be seeing over the lower 48 as a whole over the course of these next few months. March, again, definitely seems like the big wild card month as of right now. See a lot of cold air trying to seep its way in through the northern states. That's partially going to be due to the AO and negative NAO phases, where cold air is going to be more apt to slip in. But with no polar vortex or stratospheric heating involved here, or less of it, I don't know how far south this would make it if this does indeed happen. Again, we're looking super far out in the range. But as you can see, a little warm nose right there. It's going to be dry over here. Also, increased warmth over here. By this point, I would assume also the Gulf of Mexico comes into play. So severe weather, again, I'm really interested as to how things pan out when we look at March heading into April and beyond. So we go further along here. We're seeing increasing warmth and most likely some ridging I would anticipate over towards the desert southwest here and beyond, and we're going to continue to see that trend all the way through the rest of the season here. Eventually, the entire lower 48 looks like they're going to be above average here on the month-to-month basis here. Now, again, as I said before, not every day is going to end up being a situation where we're dealing with above average temperatures. There still could be a couple cold mornings, cold afternoons sprinkled in, or below average days, but predominantly I would expect to see increased warmth, and also with that, especially early into spring, maybe some severe weather to go with it. Winter storms, of course, are still possible as well, but I think we'll start to see a decrease in them as we go throughout February and beyond here. So let's go ahead and take a look at our precipitation anomalies here. Of course, in the green, we're getting a surplus. Yellow is where we're kind of on a decline. So as we go further along, this is February right here. We're kind of right in the middle in the deep south over here. We could be in the little so-called battle zone. So you could still see an average a situation where average precip is possible. And then also towards the southern states, you may be just a little bit below average there. Further out west we go, have a little bit more confidence in that. And it's unfortunate, especially given the situation over towards LA. As we go into March here, more concrete signal for above average precip for March across the eastern half of the US. I think this, again, I really think this is the time frame where I think we would start to see more along the lines of severe weather, which is usually about on schedule, I would say. As we get into April, we kind of level off a little bit. May is still very questionable, but it does look like there's a more notable signal over towards the deep south and the southeast, which will be a little bit off schedule, but not too far out of the ordinary. As we get into June and level off, we start to level off here on the moisture anomalies here. Even towards the desert southwest, it even looks like we're kind of sitting right at average here, but usually during this time of year, we're already starting to, unfortunately, be dry. Now, over towards the northeast, Ohio Valley, parts of mid-Atlantic, where we'll start to see a couple chances for some above average precip. And then just isolated spots here and there where storm systems may come through and increase the precipitation totals potentially off of this. Now, again, as I've mentioned before, all of these are very much prone to changing, especially with how ridiculously far we're looking out at range at this point. So I want you to keep in mind what we saw here on the CFS models in regards to our temperature and our precip here. So this is us looking at the NMME model here, and it's pretty much showing the same thing in regards to our temperatures. Pretty common trend that we're going to see plenty of warming over the lower 48 as a whole here heading from February onward. Now, one thing that I'm keeping note of in particular is, as I've said before, once again, out towards the southwest is where we have the highest confidence in above average temperatures. Towards other regions, we're still expecting it to be above average, but I think the most significant impacts are going to be over towards the southwest in regards to temps. Now, if we were to go ahead and take a look at this month to month from here, as we get towards March, notice the difference here. The drier setup over here definitely seems to be more prominent towards the southeast. But again, pretty common theme here that we're seeing over towards Ohio and Tennessee valleys, and also over towards the northeast mid-Atlantic, seeing above average precip there, as well as the northwest. Go further along here, and it stays pretty consistent. Interesting thing to make note of here is that this model is also kind of showing a little bit more in the way of increased precip towards the deep south for June. Like I said, very much prone to changing, so take all of this with a grain of salt. But some interesting stuff that we're seeing here across the board. So one thing I'm going to be making note of course, is March. March definitely looks like one of those months where we may have to keep an extra close eye on it. Nothing too far out of the ordinary, especially if you live in Dixie Alley. We know what the deal is. Of course, nothing guaranteed right now. It could be a slow month. We'll have to wait and see. I hope I didn't jinx it. But in any case, though, that's all I got for you guys in this video. Hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you guys in the next one. Till then, it's been Metalhead Weatherman telling you to have a nice day.